Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics with the Week 7 preview on our hands. Tom, we talked about last week that when we were doing our mid-season check-in pod, just, the pure volume of podcasting, we were doing some 6 hours, 3 pods in a row and just checking in to see how you were doing as far as your self-care routine. We have a shortened week with games on Friday, which once again, you shout out the schedule makers, and I'll do that as well as far as how they set up teams for success. 3 teams on the bye, but obviously, we talk about how teams prepare off a short week. Tom, how the heck are you doing on a shortened week of OUA football in terms of the self-care, getting yourself ready for another pod? We're here, we're fresh, we're ready to go with all the hot takes we got in tow.
Yeah, the self-care routine had to get sped up a little bit here. I got my vocal training had to get done a little bit faster here to make sure that we were on time for our Friday releases. But I'm just more excited because it means one less day that I have to wait for some OUA football. And thank the Lord that while, yes, it's great to have these games on a Friday, we do still get at least one on a Saturday that's highlighted in another night game, baby. So, yes, I am very excited that the fact that I don't have to wait as many days to see some OUA football.
No doubt. And I mean, obviously I say that kind of jokingly. We release the pods on Thursdays anyway, so it's going to come out at our normally scheduled time. And honestly, we'll get to that Saturday night game when we get there. But just seeing that 8 o'clock start on a Saturday night, Tom, it's giving me flashbacks of a game last year involving one of these teams. Western at Laurier, or was it the game in Ottawa? I'm trying to remember. One of the first week,
Queens at Ottawa.
It got delayed because of that crazy storm. And I just remember me and Nate texting each other, and it's like 10 p.m. on a Saturday, and us nerds are just like, this is the coolest freaking thing ever. So maybe we'll get that with that matchup. Maybe we'll get it with Battle Toronto or the Carleton Queens game, as those are later evening starts on Friday night. But before we jump into it, Tom, as we said, only the 4 games to cover this week. Once again, shout out the schedule makers and trying to make sure that you get an extra 2 teams with the bye on this week. And in the case of week 7, it's the Guelph Griffins, the Windsor Lancers, and the Western Mustangs who are on the bye week. And all of them are in Western and Windsor are very similar territory. We just saw that great matchup last week. Western picking up the win, Guelph obviously in sort of the state that they're in with so many injuries. So just a quick check-in, Tom, we'll start with the Guelph Griffins. How are the Guelph Griffins spending their Thanksgiving bye week in your estimations on this one?
Well, I can tell you live from Griffin Stadium, everyone is saran wrapped around like Bubble Boy to make sure that nobody has any additional injuries here and that we're bumping into each other super soft, super light, trying to get back to somewhat healthy against all of these injuries that they're dealing with.
Well, and if you go to a Guelph game, you'll notice that part of their, whether it's at halftime, quarter break, they do one of these games where they'll put someone in that giant bubble and they'll race them. Yeah, I guess they just bought like 55 of those things and they're just, playing whatever kind of crazy version of football that would be. For the Windsor Lancers, how are they spending their bye week? They lose their first game of the season, hard-fought game at home against Western. What's your you looking into your crystal ball of what's going on in Win City on their Thanksgiving bye week?
Well, the majority of these Windsor Lancers are enjoying their regular Thanksgiving and praying to the football gods that Mr. Joey Zorn enters into the, shout out all my Dragon Ball Z fans, hyperbolic time chamber and comes out ready to go Super Saiyan on the rest of this season.
Next time on OUA Football, will Joey Zorn be back in action? And for the Western Mustangs, they roll into their bye week still undefeated. But, as we said, it's not like undefeated seasons we've seen before for Western. How do you see them on this bye week celebrating Thanksgiving and how they're trying to prepare for the tail end of their regular season?
Well, you know that Coach Marshall holds these Mustangs to a very, very high standard and makes sure that they are championship ready each and every single season. And this year has been no exception. The one aspect that we do see, and once again, Ken Waller also pointed out to us, which always shout out to Ken Waller. shout out. He pointed out to us that these Western Mustangs, in 6 out of the 6 games that they have played, have scored more penalties than any one of their opponents that they have faced against, including the Windsor Lancers, who currently sit number 1 in the OUA. So if I know Coach Marshall and I know this Western team, I can guarantee you that all, call it 110 Mustangs, those who dress and don't dress, are all sitting in the sin bin for the duration of this bye week to try to get their heads straight and stop with all these penalties.
Yeah, I mean, they might be doing 2-a-days this week to make up for that. But anyways, that's just our little check-in with the teams on the bye. But let's get into the action. And our games start on Friday afternoon at that. Tom, your McMaster Marauders have done you dirty all year long, just pulling at your heartstrings left, right, and center. This is a 1:00 start. Waterloo in Hamilton at Ron Joyce taking on McMaster. Waterloo coming off of that tremendous victory at home against Guelph. Mac obviously with the loss on the road against U of T. Obviously, given your own work schedule, once again, as much as one might think we get paid incredibly handsomely to do this work that we do, that's a big bupkis on that. We make a total sum, good golly, of actually probably negative dollars on this endeavor. But nonetheless, you got to feed your family. You're working during that day. Are you going to be sneaking like some OUA TV on your computer, on your phone, or are you just going to say, you know what, I'll check in some box scores. I know you've got a lot of frustrations. You got a lot off your chest on that last pod. Are you almost happy you might be unable to watch this one live? Where are you at thinking about this matchup?
Well, as many of my friends, I'm sure, will tell you, Zach, I am a masochist. And so I will be sneaking this game into my work schedule some way, somehow. I think on this Friday, we are going to be trying to clean something up or doing some manual labor, getting out of the office here a little bit. So I'm hoping that I can just throw in the old AirPods, tuck the game into my my pocket and go from there. And hopefully no one's going to look at me any different if I start swearing very loudly.
And let's hope that your bosses and coworkers don't listen to our podcast. But at the same time, let's hope they do. Tom, the story in this one, it has to be, what is Waterloo going to pile up in their rushing attack against McMaster? We joked about how Mac single-handedly beat themselves, and I know that kind of, for maybe U of T fans, weren't too happy about that commentary because it takes away from the nature of how U of T's defense forced McMaster into a lot of those situations that led to U of T's defense scoring 21 points. But nonetheless, that was obviously the big thing for them. But it should be noted just how, we like this. We really like a lot of things on this defense, but with the way Waterloo's running, I certainly don't think they're going to go away from that. And man, with how physical they are, I think that's the very first thing I'm watching on this one. From that standpoint, before we even touch McMaster's offense and just everything and anything that they were last week and what they've been this year or haven't been, how do you feel about Mac's defense holding up against what is the best rushing attack by the numbers in the OUA so far this year?
Certainly. Now, when you look at this McMaster team, very clearly the bright spot is this defense. However, after watching them against teams like Guelph and even to some extent Toronto here as well, Toronto does finish with about 182 on the ground, which for a team that we've been struggling saying, oh, Adam Williams, where has he been going? He finally starts to come off a little bit. He gets 85 yards. Scott Barnett takes off for 55 yards against them as well. I think that the strength of this defense lays in the secondary. I think it's a lot harder to pass on them than it is to run on them. Not to say that other teams haven't gotten success, but you get what I'm saying here. I think that this Waterloo team is pretty well set up to do some great things on the ground here. So I don't think that they rush for quite as many as Guelph, because I do think that this McMaster defense is better than that Guelph defense. But I'm still saying 200, 250, something in that range.
No, definitely. And like you're definitely right. And I'm with you in terms of, hey, we've been saying it all year. Really like this Max defense. I agree. Probably stronger in the back end of that defense. Their rush defense kind of falls middle of the pack. But here's where I'm that much more concerned, where when you think about a team like Waterloo and just how they're, as we've said, one of the things I've loved about them is that even when we were counting out their season as far as making the playoffs before that Guelph game, is that just when you look at the way they go in game after game, they make the switch from Caban to Orr, that they just say that, hey, our best way to move the ball and to give us a shot winning, regardless of time score situation, is to run the ball. Versus maybe a team thinks, hey, we're down a couple scores, we got to air it out a little bit more. They are going to run it. And obviously we know that tires out a defense. So let's flip the script a little bit now, because we obviously saw, well, in the case of the game against U of T, I mean, golly, it wasn't as if actually that I don't have the time of possession in front of me, but I mean, Mac was giving up the ball, what was it, 6 times in that one, and they have to deal with, and once again, shout out to those guys on U of T, but that offensive line is going against Tyson Hergott this week. And I certainly, maybe we set an over-under of just like, I think if you're playing along at home, the over-under for sacks for him, I think is 3.5 on this game, which is bananas. So you think about a defense, you think about an offense for Mac, where they've had so much difficulty on the offensive line, especially that much more so against better pass rushers, like obviously. You think about a team in Waterloo who's offensively wants to run the ball, that wants to, pound the rock. You're tiring out that defense, and then on the flip side, where they could then end up turning over Mac or getting some 2-and-outs and keeping that Mac defense on the field that much longer. And that's where I really see in the grand scheme of this, where I'll go ahead and say, though, plenty more to talk about in this one, I'm taking Waterloo in the game, in large part because whether it's tight early on, I just feel like Waterloo is going to just tire out this Mac defense. I haven't checked the weather for Friday, but it's an afternoon game. So, I mean, if it's anything like the weather we've had all week, it could be incredibly hot as well. So that's the thing for me. You add in on top of their commitment to the run game being as good as they are, a defense, particularly on the back of a guy like Tyson Hergott, that will give Mac's offense headaches. And that's where on the whole, that's pretty much my simplest breakdown of this game.
Certainly. It is interesting to note, I do have the stats out in front of me here. In this last McMaster-Toronto game, Toronto 22-34 with the rock, with time of possession. Mac 36-38. So quite a fair, 14 minutes of difference in terms of time of possession for McMaster over Toronto here. I think it was because, to be fair, they did the majority of the scoring, with both 19 for them and 21 for Toronto. So they were on the field quite a fair bit. But yeah, I think that's kind of been the story of this entire year. This defense comes out in the first quarter, even first half, they're stellar, they're fantastic and everything. And then time and time again, they get worn down, constantly being put into negative situations where they're having to come back from either a pick or a fumble, or even if the offense does its thing, whatever, still a lot of times they've been going 2-and-out. And so that defense, maybe they come out with a big stop and a long drive and everything, and then they go back to the bench, and then 2 plays later, we're punting, we got to get back up, and we got to get back ready again. And so eventually that wears people down, certainly. And when you have, a great run game like Waterloo does, and some great backs to go along with it, that's only going to add into the fatigue that I'm sure this team is going to be feeling here. You talk about how important guys like Anthony Miller and Quentin Springer have been to this Waterloo team. Even that offensive line, like I've said, we talked about it on the review. I really liked what I saw against this Guelph team. Sure, Guelph has a ton of injuries, whatever, but going up against a team that does a 30 front primarily, and having that, once again, man style of blocking, it can be really confusing if you've got guys who are moving all over the place, which I think Guelph tried to do in that game, and they sorted it out. That takes great communication, great chemistry across all 5 of those offensive linemen for Waterloo. And I think that's something that's going to continue on into this game as well. And I think we're going to see a lot of real success here. And with that, I'm hoping to see a little bit more from Nick Orr here. I think that he's shown some things that are good, but still in that golf game, I mean, he only throws it 15 times. He only connects 5 times, but that's still enough to get the job done. I don't know if it's going to be enough for this McMaster team. I know that, Mac has had a fair bit of struggles, certainly. But for this Waterloo team, even if you do decide to get past, or not even decide, if you do get past Mac doing what you're doing here, if you want to continue on into this hopeful playoff push, your passing game needs to come up a little bit more.
You're definitely right. And on the one hand, I'm kind of thinking back to the brilliant point you made coming off of the Panda game, where I was kind of raising a bit of alarm about, man, hey, Ottawa, like you gave up a lot of rushing yards to Carleton, a team that has, for the last half decade, not run the ball that well, or not quite a full half decade, but they haven't run the ball that well of late. They've clearly shown they're wanting to pass the ball, and Ottawa's defense has done a good job stopping some really good running attacks. And on the flip side, it might have just been like perfect game plan versus perfect game plan for Carleton's favor in terms of the success they had on the ground, of Carleton being like, let's do the thing we don't think they're going to expect us to do, and let's run the ball a lot to our guys like Gale and Ferguson, and then for Ottawa saying, you can go ahead and run it on us, right? So from that standpoint, we think about guys for Mac in the back end, your Nana Yasurbes, your Josh Cumbers, your Drake Bodie's, Ballantine, like some of these guys, right, who are really rock solid. And so then maybe they say, let's commit a little bit more into the run. But then what'll be interesting to see is then Waterloo, whether off the jump or after they see perhaps Mac come out with that defensive setup, if they so choose to, exactly to your point, say, all right, hey, Nick Orr, this is go time. This is your time. And let's not forget, he still has James Basiliga as his number 1 receiver there. Like, it's not as if, like, they just really haven't given him the attempts to really ball out, which I think is fair. Like, whatever that means to his development fully as a team, like, once again, having had that opportunity to be in Waterloo, calling the game, talk with a lot of the coaches and everything like that. This is a team that believes in the now for them. The future is now. Not that means that they're making Yates Cups runs, but certainly no one in Waterloo is surprised that they're in a situation now where they can make it into the playoffs. So from that standpoint, once again, whether those lack of attempts for Nick Orr stunt his development, or whatever you want to call it, as far as his growth in the future, they just look at this as being like, no, we run the ball as well, as good as anyone else. So the question then becomes, if Mac decides to hunker down into the run game, how can they attack? On the flip side, though, and just going back to, like, I won't be surprised, as we said, if Mac can slow them down a little bit. But we talk about how time score situation doesn't really matter for Waterloo. They run the ball, and it's exactly the same for Mac, but on the opposite side of the coin, where we ran the number last week or on the last pod, and I have it somewhere on one of my tabs here, of Keegan Hall. Yeah, Keegan Hall being, I think it was 57 attempts passing, more than the second highest leader in the OUA. No matter what's going on in the game, they want to sling it out there. It's an offensive line that's had struggles all day long, and I think then, and we like a lot of skill guys for Mac too. That's what, as you said, a lot of your frustration comes from the potential that this team should have. And when they have shown glimpses of being a top team or at their best, it looks really good. But I think if you're Waterloo, you're saying we can get home with 4. We can get home with 4, no doubt. And it might be a situation where maybe Mac's showing a little more support towards Hergott's side, and then maybe we see someone else really ball out for them. So at the end of the day, that's my pick. It's Waterloo in this one, even if it's tight and they pull away late. I I think that they'll get it done offense at some point, whether they just want to commit to the run no matter what Max shows them and just say at some point, like that giant flaming battering ram that the Orcs brought to Helm's Deep, just trying to break through the gates and eventually, hey, well, luckily the good guys won in that one. But the big thing for me is Hergott versus this offensive line with the number of times that we know they're going to let Keegan Hall sling the ball out.
Oh, a Dragon Ball Z reference and a Lord of the Ring reference on one pod. We are nerding out here, and I love it so much. Yeah, I think that going back to this Waterloo offense here, I think they're going to continuously do what's really been working for them, which is run the ball. And once again, we're at week 7 now, which is mind-blowing. Can't believe that we're going by so fast. But we're out of the realm of, we were surprised because they were running the ball so well. Teams are preparing for this and they're still doing it. So I think it's the same thing when you look at the opposite side of the ball with Tyson Hergott. Maybe week 1, week 2, it's whoa, this kid is really coming off. Maybe he's not going against whatever. Teams know. That this is the dude. He is the guy for this Waterloo defense, and he's still doing his thing. And the crazy thing is, yes, obviously he's most impressive getting after the quarterback, but he's got 3 or 4 pass breakups. He's kind of been all over the field for this Waterloo defense here, getting sacks, tackles for loss, forced fumbles, pass breakups. He's kind of doing a bit of everything here. And I think that allows the rest of this Waterloo defense to also be very good themselves, because now suddenly you can't just leave Hergott one-on-one, and especially McMaster. You cannot leave Hergott one-on-one here. So you have to allocate more resources in order to block Hergott, which then frees up everybody else on your defense for them to start making plays and for them to try to come up and do some special things here. So yeah, you alluded to it on the review pod, but for the last 2 games of Mac's season, I am not picking McMaster. So I guess I spoil my picks for next week, but it's Waterloo in this one.
Yeah. Double Warriors pick on the road once again, 1:00 start on your Friday. If you're just tuning in as Tom is with an AirPod and listening to the broadcast, and I guess because it's a Mac home game, I guess there'll be. I mean, you'd have to be in the area, but there'll be a radio broadcast of it, right?
Certainly, yep. There certainly will be.
Beautiful. Well, we'll see how this one turns out. Let's move on to our next game. Also on Friday, we're moving to 6:00 start in Kingston. It's the Carleton Ravens hitting the road to take on the Queens Golden Gales. Tom, you've played in a lot of high-stakes games over your career, and I have to think that for the Ravens, for the GGs, no matter how the season's going, and we obviously saw the emotion of that game from both how the fans showed out and just literally how that game finished up, that coming off of games like that can propel a team forward. And obviously it can also depend if you're on the winning side or the losing side of that, right? And on the flip side for Queens, they're coming off of their York game where we saw this guy Anthony Leo at quarterback, and we knew it wasn't going to matter, right? We knew that they could, put my buddy Matt Nesbitt in at quarterback, and they'd have won that game. But please don't do that. He will get hurt. Do not do that. Even if he doesn't get hurt, Nesbitt. We need to protect my buddy Nesbitt at all costs. But we knew. So on the one hand, you have a team that's coming off of. And I still in the playoffs, there's certainly still a viable possibility for Carleton. So no doubt, that could still be in the mix. But I think a road playoff game for Carleton in the first round wouldn't necessarily still live up to the excitement of Panda game, right? They lose that one, as tight a game as you can. The fans rush the field before the field goal, and then they lose it like that, kind of a la 2009 Grey Cup with Montreal and Saskatchewan, kind of. And then Queens, on the other hand, where you could just sleepwalk through the game. Kasari puts up the gaudy almost 300 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns that he does. Souls does his thing and everything like that. How do you, from that standpoint, once again, as someone who's played in just massive games like that, how you bounce back off of knowing that that was wild and just having to kind of recoup, and also someone who no doubt's been in games where you beat the crap out of the other team and then having to bounce back off of that? Where do you see that component of this game first and foremost?
I think the really good teams who are able to continuously get up for every game, regardless of what happened last week or what's coming up next week, is just to be able to, for example, this Ottawa team or this Carleton team, you've gone in. It's now Wednesday night that we are recording this. You've already watched the film on Sunday. You're now a couple of days into practice. You've just finished up day 2 or potentially day 3, depending on when they practice because it's a shorter week, whatever. But now you are 100, like Panda has, it's over, it's done. You don't even think about it anymore. You are a mindset of you're 0-0. You're going in for your first win of the season. It's the first game of the season. Like it has to be, nothing else matters except for this week. Because if you're continuously talking about, if I had just done this one thing in that game, or if we had done this, or maybe if this had been different, if you're focused so much on what's already happened, you will miss what's about to. So that's the biggest thing that all of these teams can do. And you certainly, like, you look at the Westerns of the world, the Lauriers, even back when you and I were playing, like, it's the same thing. Like, hey, yeah, this is amazing. We just beat X team and it was a really tight game and this is awesome. But that's done now. We're on to the next game. It's the next game of the season. It's the next game. It's the next game. It's the next game. That's the mindset you have to have for both of these squads here, because realistically, both of them, yes, Carleton lost the Panda game, and that's gut-wrenching final seconds. Campbell Faird doing his thing, showcasing why he's built different, and he hits that 55-yarder. And then you look over at Queens on the other side, and they do their thing, and they beat York by the margin that they did. And that's kind of, once again, like a false positive, because that can instill some more confidence than maybe should be. And not to say that they shouldn't, but you understand what I'm saying here. So both of these squads have a lot of good reason to forget about last week and to focus on this game. More than anything, both teams are 2-3. You are very precarious at 2-3. You win this game, you're back at 500. You're at 3-3. You're all right. You lose this game, 2-4. Ooh, suddenly it's a drastically different conversation you need to have. Now, there's still 3 games left in this season, so there is still obviously the opportunity to win the last 2 and get to 4-4. But man, talk about a huge change in mentality going from 3-3 to 2-4.
No doubt. And what I'm really, I'm going to stick with I'm going to go with Carleton because, or let me frame it like this. Once again, the Queens conversation, it's all about the fact that, like, we're not getting Vreeken back in the regular season. I do not, like, that's not any insights I've gotten from anyone at Queens. It's just, having, 2 brain cells to rub together and be able to say, like, yeah, as we've said now for a couple weeks, if he has a break, if he hasn't been able to go right now, then clearly he can't go till it's healed. And if it's a break, then you'd think it's at least a month, maybe 6 weeks from when it happened, right? What's been really impressive with this Carleton team, is that, and you look, they've played Laurier, they've played Western already, really strong running teams. And this is a Carleton team that, kind of pairing well with their lack of a rushing attack over the last couple of years, has been a bit of a sieve in their rushing game through the last couple of years as well. Tom, do you know off the top of your head where they sit right now defensively in terms of rushing yards per game? Or best guess?
Let me say, I'm going to say 4.
That's a great guess. They're 3rd right now.
Wow.
Only behind Queens and Western. And what I'm really fascinated to see, because, once again, it's going to be the Kasari and Souls show here for the Queens Golden Gales. I do think, and I'll finish this comment before my brain goes in a million different directions, as it so often does on this podcast and just in general in my life, where Carleton has, a tall task as far as their defense goes against Queens. We know that. Even if Vreeken was in there, I mean, obviously we saw Vreeken get a lot of attempts as well, but, like, they're still going to want to run the ball. Then they get Waterloo and they get Guelph to round out their season. And so for Carleton, obviously you need to I mean, if you don't get at least one win of those three, you're certainly done. If it's just one win, we talked about that 3-5, does that get you in? We don't know. But regardless, like, this is a tall task that they are on the course of. And actually, they come off a week where they held Amilcar Polk to about 80 yards, the best single rusher in the OUA. So from that standpoint, I'm really curious to see if this rushing defense can hold up to what they've been. And as you said, talking about with Tyson Hergott, we're going to week 7. Like, we're pretty confident at this point. We have a sense of what teams try to do and who certain individuals are and everything like that. We talk about Ife Onyeka on that defensive front, some of the other guys, and just that general speed that they play with. So A, it's been incredibly impressive, but then B, I'll pass it back to you, thinking that Queens likely is going to want to, lean on their running game with, having either their second or third running back. I still don't know what happened to Russell Weir coming off of the Windsor game. Maybe it was just a virtue of the 2 pick sixes and they're like, let's try someone else out. How do you feel this defense can hold up against this Queens rushing attack? Obviously, that last game being a bit of not outlier, because obviously, as we've said, we're allowed to give praise for things you do against York, but also knowing, like I said, they've already faced Western, they've already faced Laurier, and they're still the 3rd best rushing defense this year in the OUA.
Yeah, I think you took the words right out of my mouth here. They've already played 3 of the top rushing teams in the OUA. Maybe Laurier, maybe it's a little bit further down there because whatever else, but still, Western, Ottawa, and Laurier, all very strong offenses. And for the fact that you are still ranked 3rd in rushing defense is huge. You've already played against a lot of the big dogs here. Obviously, you're going up against Queens, but you don't play Windsor. So this is kind of the biggest test to see how good is that rush defense really, because you look at teams like Laurier, like we said, I think they're a little bit more focused on the pass than they on the run, but it was week 1, so they would have relied on that maybe a little bit more. But anyways, you go up against Western, Keon Edwards, kind of a good player.
Kind of all right,
maybe,
yeah.
Maybe a little bit. You go up against these Ottawa GGs, Amilcar Polk, he's okay. He's all right. Yeah. And you do your thing against all of those teams. Now, Western does end up finishing with about 300 yards on the ground, but still, you're obviously doing enough to stay in that 3rd ranked spot here. I think that this team is really going to try to come together and really focus heavily on this rush defense, certainly, because when you have a team like Queens, who is out, for sure their starting quarterback, maybe even their backup in Russell Weir, depending on what happened at Windsor, even if Russell Weir is back and they go with him, you've got a backup quarterback or a backup's backup in Leo versus Anthony Souls and Jared Kasari, who were 2 of the best running backs last year. Where do you think they're going to lean their all of their head on? Yeah, it's going to be that run game. There's no secret here, folks. It is going to be interesting to see what, if it is Anthony Leo or whoever is in at quarterback, what they can do against this Carleton team. But regardless, yeah, they're going to be leaning heavily on that run, and the soul of this Carleton team and how well they are going to react is going to be based off of how well can you stop Souls and Kasari.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And, you're right. Western still gets theirs on the ground. And the Laurier game, that was, I think, when we still didn't see Tanner Nelms in for Laurier, right? And obviously Quentin Scott's the guy in the backfield. But Nelms, when it's Nelms and Scott, that's when that running game's at its best. But I forget if this was a comment going into the Windsor game or coming off the Windsor game. For Queens, and as we kind of said, they're still in a really strong position right now where they're home against Carleton, they're on the road against Guelph, they host Ottawa at the end of the season, where they're certainly in control of their destiny. They'll make it to the playoffs at 4-4. They could very, I won't say easily, but you could see them winning out these last 3 games, and then they're maybe even in a position No, they'd certainly be in a position to host a first round playoff game, because then they would have beaten Ottawa and they would certainly be ahead of them and everything like that. And you go back to the fact that it took the miracle, the miracle at New Richardson for Western to come out on top, that rock fight of a week 1 matchup against Laurier, and how that one shook down, and then the fact that they were down to their second and third string quarterback throwing pick sixes left, right, and center against Windsor on the road, that led to that. We keep calling it's the season from hell, and part of it is because, once again, this ain't horseshoes. Being close don't matter at all. You can only play who you have available to you on your roster, but that it's still like. As much as, you say it's 2 and 3 teams, and that feels crazy to think about, that Queens is 2 and 3 right now. We're going into week 7 and all those things. And yes, their defense is certainly good enough that it'll give Carleton a tough time. And obviously, as we talked about, maybe we get the return of, I think we heard possible whispers, there could be a Silas Hubert return coming soon, right? And that would just, my goodness, to think of having Hubert and Van Wishart and Newell up front, all those other guys that we talked about in that Queens defense. But I still believe, because Queens is so in charge of their destiny, unless they know for sure that we'll get Vreeken back at the start of the playoffs, so you know what, we just got to put ourselves in the best scenario to just win these games, which for right here and now means they run the ball. Because they know Vreeken's situation obviously better than we do. If the situation, though, is one in which his status is more precarious than we even sort of playing, armchair doctor over here. If it's even worse than we think it is, then I believe whether it's Leo or Weir, no matter how good that running attack is, and knowing that, you run the ball, if you just commit to the run, even as good as that Carleton team is, that's your key to victory in this game here. But that at a certain point, you gotta have some mojo going for whoever that quarterback is. If it is the case that this isn't just, hey, we need someone in there to hand the ball off to Kesari and Souls for the last 3 games. You are actually going to be the guy to lead us in the playoffs. And no matter what you like, it doesn't put all the injuries things away. And because at the end of the day, it's Queens, and people aren't going to care how injured you were. And you have the Vanier host. Like, you cannot wave a white flag here at Queens and say like, oh, we were hurting. And they're all valid reasons why this Queens team, might not even make it back to the Yates, right? And I'm not stamping that necessarily, but they've been probably the second most banged up to Guelph this year. It's totally valid. But when you're the Queens Golden Gales with those tricolors, you're hosting the Vanier right now, you cannot have anything but no, we are still planning to be there in that last game, which to me, if Vreeken's status is more precarious than we might even think it is, though the run game is as good as anyone else's, and that defense could get that much better, I think you still need to start, letting a Leo, letting a Weir spin it, kind of on the flip side with Waterloo, where it's like, hey, Waterloo at the end of the day, you win games, get into the playoffs, great. You know what I mean? If Nick Orr doesn't throw out a heck of a lot, that's all right. He'll get better in the offseason, all those types of things. Queens is win now and win everything now.
Most definitely. And I don't think that, when you really look at this Queens schedule here, yes, they're 2 and 3. Yes, that's a little scary. Who are the 3 losses to? Laurier, Western, and Windsor, the top 3 teams in the OUA. So it's not like they're losing to some schlubs off the street kind of thing. Like, they're losing to the best teams in the OUA right now. And something that is a little bit interesting, and I definitely wanted to point out here, both of these teams obviously 2 and 3. Both of these teams, their 2 wins, Toronto and York. So it's a little interesting here. And same thing with Carleton. They obviously lost to Laurier, they lost to Western, and then they just lost a very close nail biter against Ottawa, who I think, now that Jansen is back, is certainly better than what we've seen before, but we'll get into that at a later point here. So right now, both of these squads are in that mid-tier of the OUA, trying to figure out who's going to take the upper edge here. And I think that if you're Queens coming into this game, yes, we talked about it. Yes, this seems like the season from hell, but you haven't really lost against anybody who's uber surprising looking back at things now. Yet, yes, that Laurier game, that was a big shocker, but Laurier has really showcased the fact that they are legit. They are one of the teams to beat in the OUA, and obviously Western and Windsor. We've already been talking a fair bit about those two teams. So I think it's very possible that Queens pulls their socks up a little bit here, gets those tricolors all reorganized and sorted, and comes away with a big W here and says, you know what? We are back on track. We can get this team back to going where it needs to be. All we got to do is really focus on getting back into the playoffs. And then if everything goes well and you finally obviously get over the hump, and if they did actually make it to the Yates Cup and win it, the rest of the games are at home anyways. So I'm sure that's the mentality that a lot of these players are making here. And I guarantee, even if this squad was 1-5, there's no chance that Coach Steve Snyder is going to let them just, okay, that's it. It's a wrap on the year. We're going to just hang them up and go home kind of thing. No, they're going to come out clawing and fighting and biting and doing whatever they can to try to get another big dub here. So I don't think that this Queens team just goes away, but like you said, you got to figure out what you're doing in the air. Man, you cannot beat these teams without a solid passing game. At least just something in there that you can somewhat rely on and take some of the pressure off of your run game, because if you don't showcase that you have anything really legitimate back there, put 8 in the box and force you to try to beat me through the air. That's what every team here is going to be doing against you, and especially a team like Carleton that has such a strong rush defense already. Man, you got to make sure that you can do something in the air, whether that's Weir, whether that's Leo, or by some miraculous feat, Vrikin comes back in this game. You have to sort out that passing offense.
Yeah, and as you said, like, if they do manage to get to that Yates and they pick up the win against whomever that is, and because this defense, because if Hubert comes back, like, this defense is so scary, and that rushing attack is so scary. But once again, knowing that this team with the Vanier hosting, and am I correct thinking that they actually have it for 2 years in a row?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so that kind of cushions it a little bit, I suppose. But obviously, when it comes to college football, university football, it's always like you can't rest on the idea of like next year, because you're always going to have someone graduate out or someone transfer, and who knows what else, and other teams getting better and things like that. But as we saw last year with Western, and where, like, because OUA teams love to run the ball in this sort of generation we've had now, a great supreme rushing attack and a really strong defense, even if that gets you out of the OUA, it might not get you further than the national semifinal, right? No. And from where we're standing right now, hey, and not that Queens doesn't deserve it, as you said, they've been in those ball games against some of the best teams, not only in the province, but when we talk about Windsor, Laurier, and Western, the best teams in the country. Like, like, put the 2-3 record aside, right? And it's not crazy for us to talk about a 2 or 3 team with those types of, upper echelon expectations, right? We know what this school is about. We know the expectations that they have. Last comment I want to make before I get over it, we got to make picks on this one, is, we saw, we've rehashed that conversation we had off the Panda about how Carleton got their run game going, and maybe that was a product of Ottawa thinking that, like, hey, you've been passing it with the best of them, so we're not going to really care about your rushing attack all that much. Our rushing defense is pretty good, all these types of things, blah, blah, blah. And Carleton says, actually, let's commit to the run and have one of our most prolific running games we've had in a few years. Then on the flip side, Tristan Lefebvre has, probably his weakest game of the season. He's held to about 100 yards under his average on the year, passing it, and part of that's a product of just fewer attempts than what he's perhaps had. I have to imagine, and once again, I'll kind of lean on to some of those big games that you've been on thinking about that, though of course none of us played the quarterback position. I forgot to actually mention this when we talked about the Panda, but I did have a sense that, Josh Jansen looked pretty good, as you said, in that game, where 25,000 people, that place was rocking for a quarterback as much as anyone else. If that's not something you've experienced before, I can only imagine how that could get in your head. I say that and saying, hey, he has a tall task again, not only because obviously the GG's defense is also good, a really tall task in this Queens defense, but I do think the Panda and all the everything going on with the fans probably made it a slightly more difficult challenge for him. How do you see him bouncing back? We know how good that passing attack can be. We know the guys in there, Hachi, Reddy, Ferdinand, and all these other guys out there as well, that Lefebvre is spreading it out to. How do you see him bouncing back off of not only a disappointing loss, but frankly a bit of a less than stellar outing from what we've come to expect from Tristan this year?
Yeah, I think that we still think very highly of Mr. Lefebvre. Obviously, I think he's got a very big ceiling here, but he's had a couple of very big tasks ahead of him. Even before you kind of look into the stats, exactly like you were saying, playing in front of 25,000 people is not an easy thing to do. It is very jarring, especially where, unfortunately, in the OUA, your average attendance outside of that game might be 3,000.
Yeah.
4 maybe. So going from that all of a sudden to 25,000, and what people don't really understand about that, or something that people miss, I would say, is that yes, obviously you've got all of those people there. You're going up against enemy territory, all that. Yeah, it can do a lot to you, but realizing that when you're down, you're letting down 12,000 plus of your own fans is almost even worse than going up against an enemy team that's just going to yell at you or do whatever. Like, that's another huge aspect to this as well, that this Carleton team obviously had to kind of deal with. Having fans prematurely rush out onto the field and then have to go back into their seats while Campbell Fair silenced the crowd. That's another big aspect of this as well. But like I said, I think that this team and Coach Grant, once again, yes, he was obviously a part of that 2019 Yates Cup for McMaster, so he's been in those big games before. So he understands what the process is and how to get to where you want to go to. So he's definitely going to make sure that this Ravens squad is purely focused on Queens and going from there. But like, we talked a lot about the Carleton rush defense and everything. Even without Silas Hubert, this Queens defense is damn good. Even just looking at some of the stats here, you're looking at rushing yards per game. Carleton's 3, Queens is at 2. You look at passing yards per game, Queens is at 3. You look at overall yards per game, that would be the Queens Gales at number 1. So, yeah, this Queens defense is damn good. Coach McManus is always a solid defensive coordinator for the Tricolor here. And I think this is going to be one of Tristan Lefebvre's biggest challenges year to date, is going up against a very strong Queens defense. And especially if Silas Hubert is back ready to go for these guys, you've got Van Wishart on one side and Hubert on the other. Whoo, that's a tough for any team, let alone a Carleton Ravens squad like this. And nothing to say against their offensive line. I think they've been doing a fine job as always. But man, when you have 2 of the premier pass rushers back there, along with all of the other strong stable of defenders that you have back there, this is going to be a very big challenge for Mr. Lefebvre. And now suddenly he doesn't have all of the distractions that is Panda game. You can just focus on the Tricolor here. But I don't know if that's going to be enough.
Do you have your pick?
I do. So when you look at this team, obviously there's a ton of questions about Queens here. They might be on their 3rd string quarterback. They might be on their 2nd. Freaking might come out of the mist out of nowhere and come back here. Highly unlikely. But there's a lot of question marks there, and that can affect a lot of the chemistry that goes on with an offense. So if you're looking purely at the offense, I'd probably give I give an edge to Carleton in this one. I give a slight edge to Carleton just based off of a little bit more consistency there at the quarterback spot and starting to see a little bit more from the run game, I guess, against this Ottawa team in particular. I think you give a slight edge to there, although marginally. Where I give the larger edge is to Queens on this defense. Yeah. And I think that is ultimately going to spell the difference in this game. I am going with the Tricolor here. I think that Carleton's offense probably does a little bit more than what Queens can do, but I think Queens is able to find the end zone regardless of who is in the backfield for them, and this Queens defense keeps Carleton on their backs.
I'm with you on the pick. I'm going with Queens too, and partly, and obviously you got to the point of saying that like ultimately the Queens defense is probably just going to be too much for Carleton to handle in the grand scheme of things. Because even if, I get where you're coming at with saying like you might give a slight edge to Carleton's offense on paper and in a vacuum. But Carleton's offense is having to deal with that Queens defense, and not that, as we already went over, not that Carleton's defense themselves is anything to sneeze at, but I think I just think that defense for Queens is going to be a bit overwhelming, and I think Queens will pull it out. I got a guy in Tyler Mullen as well, even if they're having to settle for a couple field goals instead of getting the ball into the end zone. And perhaps similarly with the Waterloo commentary, if Queens is saying, because I mean, man, if Queens drops this game, which is not, it's not out of the realm of possibility by no means. Like this is going to be a really exciting game. Like that's going to be tough. That's going to be supremely tough. So I think it is one of those situations where, though I do believe, once again, not knowing the full status of Rican, that I would like to see if Leo is the guy or if it's Weir again, try to get him rolling a little bit and get that connection with these other receivers. Same as some of the commentary we talked about with Ryan LeCandro for Ottawa going back to the beginning of the year. But you got to lean on what you do best to win this game, which ultimately is going to be the run game, as we obviously know. And that, as we said, much like with the Waterloo game, that can be difficult for Carleton. As good as their run defense has been, we've talked about how big and acclaimed that offensive line is for Queens and everything like that. And I mean, that offensive line for Carleton, as you said, they've been solid, but it's a very young offensive line on the whole, and they're dealing with some supreme pass rushers. It's Queens in this one at home. Let's move to our last of the Friday games, 7 o'clock kickoff here in Toronto. It's the Red and Blue Bowl, the Battle of Toronto, the Argo Cup. I am, of course, wearing my Argo cap in celebration of it, also to piss you off, Tom, your Oski wee wee whatever BS. Also because as the Blue Jays so unceremoniously ended their season this year, arguably even worse than when they gave up that just crazy lead to Seattle last year. It's full Argo season here now, baby. Like Leafs, Raptors, no. It's Argo's town now. We obviously, we got a lot off our chest, and I appreciated, Tom. I didn't prep you that like, hey, by the way, when we talk about Queens and York, I'm gonna kind of go off on the Lions. But I was happy that like you weren't just being like, keep going. You got in on it with me, and I appreciate that. We got a few people reaching out. Not that we were saying anything of any surprise. Mm-mm. Like we weren't. Yeah, there was nothing we were unveiling that, just nothing we were saying that was of news to anybody. But people being like, yeah, thanks for just actually saying that. In past years, Dakota used to give me crap for either not giving York enough crap, or if I gave him crap, he'd be like, why are you crapping on York? At a certain point, the frustration just builds up. But say what you want about it, and this game's going to be at York. And while, as we mentioned in that rant, they have a lovely facility, it's always it still doesn't hold a candle to Varsity Stadium, just as far as like it being downtown and all those things and everything like that. But though I unfortunately won't be able to go to this iteration of the Red Blue Bowl, Argo Cup, Battle of Toronto, I've been there a number of times. It really is like, if you're a Toronto football person, like it's a great time where you'll be seeing people from like. I would go and I'd see guys I played Metro Toronto Wildcat football with from like 10 years back, and like high school football and everything. It doesn't live up to the Battle of Waterloo, or seemingly. I've never been to the Battle of Waterloo. Certainly we talk about Panda just coming off of that, but it really is a fun event for Toronto football. Though neither team has obviously had immense success, it's not terribly long ago where we had a meaningful version of this in 2018, with that 3-5 York team, and I forget how U of T finished up, but it was actually like, hey, you know what? one of these teams could be sneaking into the playoffs depending on the outcome. Now, for both these teams, or I'll say for Toronto, as we said, them getting that win against Mac gives them this possibility where, they're not going to beat Western. We know that for sure, but pick up the win against York. If Mac does beat Waterloo this week, then you're looking at a Week 9 matchup between Toronto and York, Toronto and Waterloo, and maybe depending on what Carleton does the rest of their season, where that could be a game of a win and you're in type scenario. Tom, there's a lot of bragging rights on the line for this game. Toronto football, especially obviously, as we said, in most years where it's not substantial in terms of the actual breakdown of the OUA season. But though I don't know how York would ever win this game, this specific one right here. Like this matters for U of T more than just to say like put your crosstown rival in their place.
Most definitely. We talked about it a little bit on the review podcast, but there is an actual legitimate path that Toronto might be able to squeak into the playoffs here if they win out. Now, a whole lot of other things need to also go their way, certainly, and winning out for this Toronto squad based on everything that we've seen might be a very large task, but there's a possibility, and your crosstown rival is in the way of that. So yeah, there is a little bit extra put onto this game, as every rivalry game has a little bit extra. Lots and lots of changes here for both of these squads, even just a year prior. Remember last year, Noah Craney was at the helm for these York Lions, and Kinsale Phillip really we thought was the savior of U of T football. Craney gone with his father, and in steps Owen Webb, and kind of a list of a few quarterbacks throughout their big losses here. And for Toronto, while Kinsale is still on the squad, Scott Barnett has been taking the majority of the snaps now. And I don't know how good this change has been, or against the York team that has, to put it lightly, struggled against every other team that they've played against. Who we'll see what this Toronto squad can kind of put together here. Now, I think if anything, the strength of this Toronto team is its defense, as we obviously were showcased last week. And once again, yes, Mac blew up, and that did not go very well for those Marauders, but still, Toronto, you put something together here, and you came up with 4 total touchdowns. So yeah, you did something here. You made something happen. So I'm very excited to see this game, even despite the fact of, the combined records between these two teams. Rivalry weeks, they just have a little something extra into it. You can go on paper, as we just went through in the past Panda game. On paper, everything here was turning out to be a Carleton win against a banged-up GG offense and a banged-up GG team in general. But when push comes to shove and Pedro's on the line, baby, the GGs came and they stepped up to play. It's the same scenario in the Argos Cup here. Now, am I saying that York's miraculously going to find some offense and find some sniff? No, I am not. But I am saying that if they were ever to have a competitive game this year, it would be in this one, the Red Blue Bowl.
Most certainly. I mean, we looked at that Waterloo game early on. It was obviously York's best offensive output, scoring, 32 points in that one? 32 points. Like, come on, Waterloo, from 5 weeks ago. For Toronto, though, because as you mentioned, last year, the names at the quarterback position were different. Kinsale's still on the roster. They're going to Barnett here at this point. They've seemingly made that switch 2 weeks ago in the Queens game. Sticking with this theme of teams trying to find their best version of football down the home stretch. For some teams, it's about, you may be dealing with injury, so do you lean into the thing, like the Queens thing we just talked about, lean into the thing that makes you great even with your starter at quarterback, let's say, which is your run game, or do you say, no, we need to find out how good this quarterback is and give them reps and things like that? What I'm curious about, because by the numbers, I mean, neither of these teams run the ball well. neither of these teams pass the ball well. And defensively, as you said, I mean, give them credit for last week. Absolutely. 100%. So what I'm curious about, though, we got this guy in Barnett. We haven't really seen all that much from him. But as much as it's pained us to see his production go down, we do still know that Adam Williams can be an above average. I won't put him in the top tier because there's too many top running backs, but an average to above average running back on his best day. So here's what I want to know. On the assumption, though you're correct in saying that U of T will probably get York's best game, just from that pure rivalry and under the lights and Friday nights and everything like that. For U of T, would you, if you're out there, if you're the OC, if you're whispering into any of the ears of the movers and shakers of how they should be attacking offensively, are you saying, hey, we need to get Barnett going. Let's get the connection with, your Nigel LeGoods and your Stoikos going and things like that? Or are you saying, no, let's build up some confidence in this run game. Let's get that offensive line moving. No, Adam Williams will get his stuff going. Or is it just a well-rounded attack that you think that you perhaps think U of T will come out with offensively?
I think for this U of T team, they have every aspect of the offense they really need to work on, because obviously we have not really seen anything close to what we saw last year. So there's every aspect of the game I think they need to get better at on the offensive side of the ball. I think if you're picking a spot that they're going to be focusing on, I think it's going to be this pass attack. I think that whether it's Scott Barnett or if it's Kinsale Phillip, Scott Barnett really hasn't had a ton of opportunities in order to showcase what he can do in the air so far. And if it is Kinsale Phillip, he has not been anywhere close to what we saw in terms of production last year for this guy. So I think regardless, it's going to come down to production at the quarterback spot, where they really want to put a lot of their focus in. Now, obviously, they're still going to run the ball and they're still going to do it effectively, whatever. But like we said, Toronto is, spoiler alert, not going to win out, because their next week is against Western in London. So not going to do that. But if they want any chance at all with the numbers, with the miraculous, the football gods helping them out, whatever, they need to beat this York team and then need to finish with a win against Waterloo. That's miraculous getting into the playoffs. So yeah, I think in order to do that, if you're peeking over on the Waterloo side of things, that defense looks to be pretty good, and they look to, they do a lot of really good things there. But any hope that you're really going to have, I think, needs to be able to come through the air. I do think that they've got some weapons in the air, but that's where I see them going in this one. I don't think, spoiler alert, I'm going U of T to win this game, but I really think that they're going to try and go through the air and try to establish that a little bit more, even if Adam Williams hasn't showcased what we've seen from him previously. He has obviously showcased before what he is capable of doing. So he's a little bit more established than, say, Kinsale or Scott would be, especially going into this year.
Yeah, I actually like the way you frame that, where it's like, you have your known commodity in Adam Williams. So, just trust that, like, as poorly as your run game has been, you're better served trying to get this passing game going with the switch you made at quarterback. And the thing that I think is worth reiterating with U of T, and it's we'll dive into a little bit more. Maybe we'll try and track down some people who have better insights into this U of T team, is that we had, just based on like eligibility and things of that nature, reason to believe that U of T was still going to have the likes of Daniel Diodati and Michael Lehman in their receiving core this year, and two veterans to help bring along the young guys. They had good connections with Kinsale last year, and like that's. It kind of it came to mind thinking about as you were saying, talking about the different weapons that they have, of like, that really is a big part of this story this year. Like, you lose the two guys that probably would have been your best receivers. And whatever, I mean, they clearly knew that they weren't coming back, whether we knew it or not. It's not as if it was a surprise to them. But, it's tough to replace your top talent. And similar with Adam Williams, like Diodati and Lehman, I put as above average guys at the receiver position. Diodati was a great returner as well. And then you put him and Lucas Stoikos as your return guys. And that's actually really deadly. But so it's tough to bounce back, even with them, no doubt, knowing they were losing them. Just from our perspective, it was just I was just thinking that actually was huge when we saw those guys not with this team. I don't have anything to say about York on this one, so I'm going to refrain from that. I'm going U of T as well. You know what? Despite the things I said about York, and with how disappointing this U of T team has been this year, based on what we thought, and of course that was assuming that we were getting those two guys that I just mentioned back for them. I do wish I was able to go to this game. I'm out of town for it. I'll be tuning in live through OUA TV. But just hey. I certainly know by the numbers we get a lot of folks in the Toronto area tuning in to our show, many of whom will probably be there already. But if you have nothing else doing on a Friday night, go out to York Lions Stadium. Once again, it is one of the nicest facilities. It might be the nicest facility in the OUA, actually. Great sight lines. It'll be a pretty good crowd out there too. Yeah, it is a fun event for Toronto football people. So we're both on U of T on that one, to frankly no surprise there. That wraps up our Friday slate of games. Let's go to what really is a game that I've been looking forward to all year, going back to our preseason preview pods with the tiers. And that is our two B+ teams. Once again, shout out to Mad Jack Moore for bumping. Well, he was probably thinking more about the Golden Hawks than the GGs in bumping them up to the B+. But yeah, it's Laurier coming off the bye, going out to Ottawa to take on the GGs, coming off of that just incredible Campbell Fair game winning at the 55 field goal to win the Panda game, to keep Pedro in the garnet and gray. Laurier, obviously, when we go back to sort of what we thought these teams could be, and similar with U of T, of thinking there was going to be some guys in the mix for that team, specifically offensively, and then realizing that who wasn't there. I think it's fair to say that these two teams have gone, their seasons have gone slightly differently, of thinking that they're on the same tier. And it certainly has not been a bad outing for the GG so far this year. And if anything, they're an interesting parallel to Queens in many respects. And that last week nine game between those two clubs, we also highlighted, going back to the beginning of our pods this year, as something that's very interesting, and I still think is very interesting. But given everything that's gone on with Ottawa this year, that 3-2 record for them, I think you're very happy with. You have a game against Windsor that was incredibly winnable. And then you have an outing against Western where, with your third string quarterback, you actually put up some really good production in the first half. And it's just, you just can't keep up with Western. But so far, no team has been able to do so. Teams have kept up, but no one's been able to knock them off. And I do believe that if they have Josh Jansen in that Windsor game, they actually take that one at home. Similarly to how I framed the Queens Carleton game, I want to get your perspective from that point of view with this one. You have Ottawa coming off of the incredible Panda that they are, of course, on the winning side of. And then Laurier, not obviously in the same fashion of Queens, but coming off of their bye week. We know Taylor Elgersmo was tuned in watching it. He was tweeting about Campbell Fair when he hit that one. But from that sort of position of the mentality of it, Ottawa certainly thinks that they can beat this team. They don't think that, there's no kind of cowering from them. Where do you kind of position these two teams going into this game based on the respective weeks they are coming off of?
I think the one thing that we have consistently talked about here is talking about mentalities and how important that is when going into games here. Now, when you look at the GGs, obviously they're going to have a stellar mentality. They, like you said, a 3-2 team, despite all of the other injuries and everything else that this Ottawa team has been dealing with, is really solid. And I'm sure these GGs are very excited about where they are right now. They certainly control their own destiny, and they just came off of a electric game. Panda winning and bringing Pedro back for, I believe, the 5th year in a row. So, yeah, this Ottawa team is definitely coming off of something of a high and going into this game pretty much as good as they can hope for. For Laurier, coming off of a bye week, being 5-0, and you know that these Laurier Golden Hawks, the moment the schedule came up, circled in big purple circle around that Ottawa GG game to get some damn retribution for what happened last year. For those who don't remember, final score a year ago, Ottawa 21, Laurier 18. And that came off the back of, yes, Campbell Fair, but also Ben Miracle and JP Simakinda, who had huge roles to play in that game. So a lot of talent on that previous Ottawa GG team. Now, obviously, Miracle and Simakinda are no longer there. Simakinda pretty confidently been, I don't want to say replaced because he's a very special back, but I think Amilcar Polk has been doing a pretty damn good job so far this season. And while Josh hasn't been in the game for a ton of time, I still think that there's a lot of positives that I've seen from this Ottawa team, like we've been saying here. So I think that while this Ottawa team is looking good, a 5-0 Laurier team coming off of a bye week, circling and knowing that they want to beat the hell out of Ottawa to get some retribution for what they did in their backyard last year. Ooh, that's a very dangerous position to be in, GGs.
No, absolutely. And, with Laurier, it's always interesting to think about when teams get their bye weeks, both kind of when the schedule comes out, then in the midst of the season, and then when we look back with the benefit of hindsight and be able to kind of, whether it's valid or not, be able to kind of paint a narrative about like, oh, that must be what happened and that was a result of this or that, right? Because when we go back through the Golden Hawks season, they pick up that win on the road against Queens. Ugly game offensively for both clubs, but hey, you get it done and you just win, baby, right? Then they have that game at home against Carleton, and Carleton surprises, I would think, most teams outside of, well, Carleton, in terms of just the showing they had in that game they've had all year long. Then they have the outing against Guelph. Then they get the Battle of Waterloo. Then they do what they did against Mac, right? And it really just has that. And even in that Mac game, it's kind of slow in the first half, and then they come on strong. So as we talked about, and similar as we talked about with Western, where they've been in a lot of types of games and they've still prevailed, right? But then you get your bye week. And depending on how things play out in the end of the year, because you know what? Laurier, as we talked about, their home stretch here is a gauntlet. They have Ottawa on the road. They host Windsor. They have Western on the road to finish up their season. So you think about that bye week, and they're rolling. Their offense is going, is motoring. Elgersma is setting records. He's breaking records. He's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. That defense is phenomenal. Everything about this team is so fun to watch. You hit your bye week, and you wonder, Ottawa's coming off of this, you use the perfect word, electric win in the Panda game. All these things. They got this guy in Josh Jansen. He looks like he could be all right. We know the running game's going to be there. The defense is holding up despite all those injuries. And who knows what's going to happen? Obviously, we can only make our best educated guesses. But when it comes to this Laurier team, because this was kind of the whole storyline. I was going through my head today thinking about what I wanted to talk about with this game. I always come back to when it came to my attention, I think it was in meeting Ayo Ajayi and Romy Simpson, a former receiver from there, when me and Dakota did our offseason walkthrough tour back in early 2020. And talking about how with Coach Michael Faltz, This is a team that no matter what happens in their season, whether they make the playoffs or not, whether they go on a run, whatever, they keep practicing as if they're going to the Vanier every year, which, as much as my first reaction as a former player is to be like, oh my God, when the season ends, no matter how it went, whether it was successful or not, you are kind of just like, okay, I'm happy to chill out a little bit. Like it's a tough go being a student athlete. It's so darn hard, right? Mm-hmm. But then I think back to it. I'm like, no, your goal every year should be to be in the Vanier. So even if you miss the playoffs one year, if the next year you go on that run, you should have that expectation and that mentality that we've prepared, that we're ready to once again, you've had experiences going the distance, being in that final game of the U Sports season. I can only imagine how draining that is. So I say all that in saying that while, yeah, there's a way that this season could finish off for Laurier, the worst case scenario for them, where maybe I'm going to be on a pod in like a couple months or next year being like, wow, that bye week came at the worst time. They were on such a roll and all of a sudden they just lost their mojo. I don't think so, because just knowing how Coach Faulds prepares this team, and quite literally knowing, if only just through his tweets, that Taylor Elgersma not only was probably has no doubt been breaking down the film of Panda and all the other Ottawa games since the end of last week's game, but knowing he was literally just tuning in on OUA TV or wherever he was to watch it, that this team is ready to go. I do not see a step back for any reason other than what the GGs might cause them to step back. I don't see rust on this team off the bye week.
No, certainly. I think Coach Faulds is definitely going to make sure that these Golden Hawks are ready and raring to go here. And I think when you talk about the longevity and you talk about how important it is in order to make sure that you're staying healthy and you're doing everything you kind of need to make it to that final game, and how much football that really is. At least speaking from experience on the McMaster side of things, I don't know how you guys handled it when you were on your side, but during those bye weeks, obviously it's very much predicated on how well you've been doing and so far in the season, what you need to clean up or whatever else. But for the most part, during that bye week, maybe a little bit less during the middle of the season, but when you get to the bye week going into the playoffs, that is very much a mental side of things. You're doing uppers, as everybody likes to say, which it's shoulder pads and helmet, but no football pants. You're just wearing shorts. You're nice and comfy. You don't have to worry about cramming your legs into those tight pants or anything. And it's a little bit less all out hitting in that kind of a scenario, and you're much more focused around your mental responsibilities and things. So a lot of those times it's here's from an offensive line standpoint, obviously, here's our base run package. Do it against a 30 front, a 40 front, a 50 front, a 7-man up. Do it against blitzes, do it against twists, and just work things out. So regardless of who you're playing against, you can kind of sort things out and still stick to your rules on your primary runs and passing and blocking and things of that nature. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if certainly Laurier is also in this kind of scenario here. I'm sure, like everybody else halfway through the season or now a little bit over, they got a little banged up going into the bye week. Coach Foles probably not took his foot off the pedal, but got smart with it. Said, you know what? I think we've showcased that we can be a pretty damn physical team. Let's focus on the mental aspect of things. Let's see about this offense and how we can get started faster against better opponents, and how we can maintain that phenomenal chemistry that we've already been working out so far in this season here. Defensively, this Laurier team is very, very, very good. And I don't think that there's a ton of notes here that you need to be focusing on, but still, I think this has been more of a mental prep week, at least last week was. Now they're back to banging, and now they're back to making sure that they are ready to go for what is going to be a very physical matchup against these Ottawa GGs. But I think with proper load management, which I'm sure that Coach Faulds has already been doing, this Laurier Golden Hawks team is definitely going to be very dangerous coming out of this. And their own mindsets and goals going into this game are going to be exactly that: offense, let's start scoring in the first half against good defenses. Let's get this thing going. Maybe that means changing up a little bit of the play calling. Maybe that means when we get down into the red zone, we're going to focus on some other guys, or maybe that means feeding Ethan Jordan, Raiden Thorne even more than what they already have been doing. But you can guarantee that this Golden Hawk team is going to be coming out firing against an Ottawa GG team that, in their own right, just finished another very physical game against their crosstown rival.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this GG's team, defensively, it is one of those things where you got to watch it to have. I think a lot of people, once again, if you go by the numbers, and I obviously talk all the time about how much I've liked this GG's team for a couple of years now and everything like that. It's almost become a bit of a bit, but like I do like. There's so many like great players that have been in this team and Coach Belfay and everything like that. Like by the numbers, their defense, you can move the ball on them. Like it's actually it isn't like the third highest in terms of yards that they're giving up, right? 25 points a game that they're giving up and things like that. And obviously we know what this team in Laurier can do offensively, but it's really just some of those X factor guys in there, their ability to turn the teams over and things of that nature. But nonetheless, for Laurier, a tough team in Ottawa, a really gritty team, you're going out to their house, however long that drive is. I think we've given up on trying to play Google Maps over here at the 55. But as we said, then you have Windsor and then you have Western. And frankly, like Taylor Elgersma, as we talked about, like you can say he's the MVP of the league. And hey, like we both said Hillock from with a half-point check-in, but like if you're going to make the argument for Elgersma, like absolutely. Like I will not be upset one way or the other, right? Ethan Jordan, Raiden Thorne, some of these other guys that have come out of the woodwork. But kind of going back to when we talked about Carleton's rush defense, and we talked about, Western got theirs on the ground, but how they held this Laurier team, I feel like we still have yet to really see this rush defense come alive. Or pardon me, this rushing attack, I should say, for Laurier come alive. And I don't have the numbers in front of me of just like if you were to go by the percentage of how much they've been passing it to running it. And I wouldn't be surprised if their ratio of pass to run is up there with the best of them, probably with like the Carletons and McMasters of the world, perhaps third to those two teams. I feel like that's probably where it breaks down. Elgersma in pure attempts, I think it might be second to Keegan Hall or something like that. But we it almost becomes a cliched kind of talking point for us. But like especially as we get down to the end of the regular season, it's no more important than right now as far as trying to iron out every single aspect of your team. And we know that this offensive run game can be so good for Laurier. Just going back to last year, they got the pieces there, and especially with how they passed the ball. That whole concept of the pass opening up the run and how vice versa, and that can work for you. I do really want to see them commit a little bit more to it in this game, and then just seeing how that works in with their game plan, because we've talked about how good those, like when they get Windsor and Western, like it's going to be so fascinating to see what their game plans are. And not that I think you take Ottawa for granted, because I think that's a fast track way to getting upset on the road is if you look past them. And I don't, once again, you go back to just like who's leading that team. They're not going to look past this opponent and everything like that. But I do think that, once again, playing the hindsight game thing, that when we get to the end of the season, we see how their Windsor and how their Western game goes. I think there'll be clues in this Ottawa team of how they attack offensively in terms of what they were kind of getting ready for towards the end of the season. And maybe they are just going to say that we are going to, our success is in Elgersma's hands. They have stars across that defense, absolutely, at the receiver position, guys in their special teams unit, no doubt. But maybe that is just what they're saying, is that like, you know what, we are making this, the year of Elgersma, and we will go where he goes. But part of me thinks maybe they'll try and uncover something else, like I was kind of saying, maybe a bit more in their rushing attack. Do you see this Laurier team as we said, that stretch of 3 games by Elgersma going into the bye was some of the best football we've seen in a 3-game stretch, even the 2-game stretch of Mac and Guelph, of York and Guelph, of probably any quarterback in the last 10 years in, small sample size, but it is what it is. You play who you play. Do you see them kind of keeping up with that mentality of like, hey, this is clearly what makes us like our A game perhaps better than any others, is that we are so explosive in the air? Or do you see them changing it up a little bit, of course, having to take into account who you're playing that is going to determine what you try to do to get success offensively?
Yeah, most definitely. So when you look at this Laurier team and you look at the teams that they've played and they've won against, Queens, Carleton, Guelph, Waterloo, and McMaster, and really showcase some really special stuff, if you were going to change up your offense, those would have been the weeks to do it. Ottawa, Windsor, Western to finish off your season here. This is now, you know what? We've gone through the first 5 weeks of the season, and I don't even want to say that they were easy by any means, because Queens and Carleton both specifically really gave you close games. But the last 3, Guelph, Waterloo, and McMaster, you definitely were able to impose your will on those. Now you've seen what works. You've seen the capabilities that this offense has, in particular Taylor Elgersma and this passing attack. Now you're going up against an Ottawa team that's coming off of a high in winning the Panda game, and you're at TD Place as well. Then you play against Windsor, and then you finish off against Western. This is now the time to say, we found our identity on offense. We just need to fine tune it and make sure that we are as ready as possible for the last 3 games of the season here. So yeah, I think that this is going to be a big showcase in terms of what the rest of this Laurier offense is going to look like for the rest of this season. And I think that Taylor Elgersma is definitely going to be the focal point here. I don't think that's any surprise. I think even with a completely healthy Tanner Nelms and Quinton Scott, I still think that the focus would be Taylor Elgersma, because you see the production and you see how he can do things. And not to mention that, but all of his targets, obviously Ethan Jordan, Raiden Thorne, Oja Talayo as well. Like, you've got such amazing receivers to throw the ball to. You'd be silly not to focus on that. So yeah, I think that this Laurier team is definitely going to reprove or prove again, sorry, lost my words there, that yeah, their offense is pass heavy first, and that's how they're going to win these games, and that's what they're going to do here. I think for this Ottawa GG team, you have to be focused on what they're going to be doing here, because once again, they showcased a lot of wins in that passing attack. So you have to be focused on that. You have to be aware of that, and trying to stop or limit Ethan Jordan and Raiden Thorne is going to be probably the biggest task for this GG team to date so far. So lots of challenges for this GG team going into this one.
Yeah, no doubt. And I misspoke thinking that Laurier had played York. Their offense has been so stellar in that span. I'm like, they must have played the Lions at some point in there, which is just crazy to think what Elgersma's numbers could be when it's all said and done if they got a chance to play York this year. I guess the last thing I'm thinking about before I guess we make our picks in this one is that Mac game actually. And just how Mac's defense and special teams is what was able to give us, what was that at the half? It was 9-7 at the half in that one. And then Elgersma just goes off, right? And, there's in many ways some parallels, I think, defensively, certainly, with the GGs and with Mac. You add in the injuries for Ottawa, and maybe you give Mac's defense the edge, perhaps. But special teams wise, we've talked about Michael Horvat being an absolute just MVP for the Marauders. Campbell Fair obviously is incredible in the kicking job that he can do. It's in TD Place. And so I do, and with the way that Ottawa runs the ball, like it hurts 2 weeks in a row. I am picking against Ottawa I'm taking Laurier on the road, but kind of similarly perhaps to the commentary with some of these other games that we're talking about, specifically with the Waterloo game, where it's like, if you can control the time of possession by just, committing to your run game, which certainly Ottawa's going to do, if you're able to get yourself, put the other team in unfavorable field position on the back of, productive offensive drives, but then having great special teams and pinning them deep, making Elgersma drive the field, and then having a really good defense, which Ottawa does have. It's once again, same with the Carleton Queens game. I think it'll be a really good matchup, but just in the long span of this game, unless Elgersma has just his worst outing, like unless he's turning the ball over, or on the flip side of Ottawa's turning him over, they win out in the end. Though I do think it will be close, because I think Ottawa will be able to chew up the clock, commit to their run game. I mean, certainly Laurier's rushing defense is spectacular as well, so it's going to be a hell of a day for Elmar Polk. But hey, he's gone up against some really good run defenses already, and being able to still get numbers. But just at the end of the day, Laurier pulls away, they pick up the win, and you're right. They are who they are. That's kind of, I guess, a bit of the theme of what we talked about this week. Teams at this point refining their games. And if you're still trying to find your game and not refine it, then it's week 7, and guess it's what? It's probably too late at that point. So yeah, Laurier on the road. Tom, where are you sitting with this one?
Yeah, I'm lockstep once again, my friend. It's Laurier. They're going to get the job done on the road. Although the one thing that I did want to also point out, you did a great job in obviously showcasing the effect on the special team side of things. The one thing that I've been very much shocked about with this Laurier team is Dawson Hodge. His punting has been great. His field goals has been very uncharacteristically not on target for Hodge, who is normally anywhere from like the 50-yard line in, kind of automatic in previous years. Certainly struggled a little bit this year so far. I would look to see him try to get a little bit more back to form here, especially going into the later part of the season, where they're definitely going to need a solid kicker just to shore up some additional points here. But yeah, I think Laurier comes away with this one. I do think I'm leaning a little bit more towards the fact that this is going to be a close game, but with the potent power that Laurier has, and once again, highlighting the fact that this GG defense does have a lot of injuries as well, wouldn't be surprised to see Laurier also pull away with this one pretty quickly.
Yeah, no doubt. And what's kind of interesting is that, like, we already said, Laurier's not going to look past Ottawa. But if you take a peek past Ottawa and you say, oh, crap, Windsor and Western to finish up our season. So actually, you know what? We need to take care of business in this one. Because though, as we said, and you're right, like if Laurier's offense just keeps on rolling with those explosive passing, the explosive passing attack that we saw them kind of at that midseason point when they were really hitting their stride, it could get ugly with Ottawa's defense being a bit banged up. On the whole, I think it's a tight game. Don't think Folds is going to take them for granted, but it is kind of that in that funny twist of fate that by looking past them, it makes you look back at this week and be like, no. We need to go into our final 2 games 6-0 to give us the best shot here. We're not thinking about anything but Ottawa. And hey, super excited for this game. As we said off the jump, just being at TD Place, 8 o'clock on a Saturday. Who knows what the weather's going to be? Maybe we'll get, well, actually, even without the delay, Tom, it's going to be, 9:30, 10 o'clock, and we're going to be, the absolute super cool guys that we are watching OUA football on our Thanksgiving Saturday night. But what else would you rather be doing?
Literally nothing.
Literally nothing. Hey, that's your Thanksgiving slate of games we have coming up. Once again, it's Guelph Western, Windsor on the bye. Can Waterloo keep their run game attack rolling and keep that prospect of them making the playoffs viable against McMaster? Carleton and Queens, can Carleton's passing attack come alive? Who's going to be at quarterback for Queens? And do they just commit to their run? Battle of Toronto, Red Blue Bowl, Argo Cup, whatever you want to call it. How is Toronto once again with a sliver of a window still open for them to make the playoffs, going to try and attack this York team to try and, refine and all those things we talked about. And as we just said, Laurier, Ottawa, can the Golden Hawks keep up the potency of their offense off the bye? And how does Ottawa handle coming off of one of the most exciting finishes to a Panda we've seen since Nate Behar caught the Hail Mary to win that game 7-9 years ago, whenever that was. So Tom, have a incredible Thanksgiving weekend for everyone tuning in. As always, thank you for tuning in and consuming our content, however it is you've been doing so. It really means the world to us. Keep up the interactions, keep giving us your thoughts on everything we're doing. Hey, if you want to throw a 5-star rating our way while you're at it, appreciate
Please
that
do.
as well. That, maybe it'll help for something in the mix, but
It goes a long way.
it goes a long way. But to all of you, have a glorious Thanksgiving weekend, however you're spending it, and hopefully you're spending it tuning into these incredible games. Can't wait to be talking to all of you, and especially you, Tom, about the breakdown as we get into the latter third of our season. So we'll be talking very soon. We'll give you all our thoughts on these games next time at the 55.